Coming up next, the Bookening reads Dracula. Part 2 of the Bookening about Dracula, a very scary book. Oh man, that sure was an exciting rendition of Toccata and Fugue in D major that we just played. A little obvious, you might be thinking to yourself, but we might as well pull out the old Toccata and Fugue for our discussion on Dracula. I am Nathan Alberson, your humble and obedient ghost.
What?
No, your humble and obedient host. And I'm joined today by Jake Menzel, or should I say Jake Menskill?
You don't want to find out.
No, I don't want to find out. The pastor who's a master of reading. How you doing, Jake?
I'm doing well.
Excited for part 2 of our discussion about Dracula?
Very excited.
And we're also joined by Brandon Chast Fiend. How you doing, Brandon?
I'm doing well.
And you're the PhD AB... D.
As in Dracula.
Exactly. The very book that we're about to discuss more of. So let's jump right in. What do you guys think we should talk about next?
We should talk about Renfield's an interesting character.
Yeah, he's kind of interesting.
Yeah.
What do you think about...
What do I think about Renfield?
What's that sound? Oh, it's the sound of the airplane going over our heads. Indicating baggage check, where we talk about what baggage we brought to this novel. Brandon, what baggage did you bring to this bad boy?
I'm not a fan of horror, and I've always looked down on horror. That's the baggage I brought to this.
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah.
Asked and answered. Anything else?
No, I've never read it before. Probably the only horror novel I've read is Frankenstein.
You've read Edgar Allan Poe, and you probably read the classic short stories.
Yeah, I mean, in Poe, Poe never really did it for me. And so, I got to say, this blew past my expectations. It was actually good. I enjoyed reading Dracula.
There we go.
I don't know if that's a sign of maturity or a sign of giving up.
I will say to your point about, well, this isn't really to any of your points, but in talking about short stories being, I think a short story is a very natural place for a horror because short stories contain Poe's famous singularity of effect. Mm-hmm. And what you see in Dracula are a lot of really great set pieces that have this story around them. And that's why novels are kind of a weird place for a horror story, because you can't sustain that pitch. Dracula actually does a really nice job of maintaining that pitch through the first 50 pages or so, but then it has to not maintain it through the book. Anyway, be that as it may, what baggage did you bring, Jake?
Well, I'm with Brandon. I'm not a big horror fan. I have not read any horror novels. I have read Poe, short stories, ghost stories, stuff like that. Not seen a lot of horror films either. The only film, it's not an adaptation, the only film representation of Dracula that I can think I've ever seen is Monster Squad.
Monster Squad.
Yeah. Which I've seen many, many times.
Which has not the cinema's most effective Dracula, in my humble opinion.
I have to agree with you. I mean, I can only assume that.
Right. My baggage is I grew up with this book. I read it when I was probably about 12 or 13, and I really responded to it. I really liked it. I really liked horror. I was really into it. I really always liked stories of the uncanny or supernatural, that kind of stuff. I will say, in my defense, as I mentioned earlier, the thing that I really responded to was not Dracula, who seemed pretty just by the book as far as vampires go. I mean, he basically is the book as far as vampires go. But the thing that really captured my imagination as a 12 or 13-year-old was this story of these dudes coming together and banding together and conquering evil. I just thought that was really cool. Van Helsing seemed like a really awesome father figure, and the idea of like protecting these this virtuous lady from a certain doom appealed to me and fired my imagination. And I would say a pretty healthy way, actually. I think there are maybe ways in which I needed to grow past that and hopefully have, but I don't think it was really, I think it was actually good literary experience, I would say, for me at the time. I have seen, I think I figured it out, over 40 Dracula movies, which probably wasn't such a great experience in my life, but that's just movies with the name Dracula, with a character named Dracula in them. I've seen many more vampire movies. I was really into vampires for a long time. I come at it from the opposite perspective. I come at it as vampire connoisseur, if you will.
I will say another element of baggage that I brought was a real expectation that, in line with what we were talking about earlier, that this was going to be very, very sexual and sensual, or overtly sensual. And I was concerned about the effect it was going to have on me.
Right.
Coming into it.
Did you find that was a valid concern?
No.
I think the scene, I guess we'll get into this later, but the scene that comes the closest to being over the line is obviously the Mina scene, which almost feels like it's out of another novel. It's so, to me at least, potent.
The Jonathan scene is, in a different way. Both of those are, But
the Mina scene is just so rapey and so dark and provocative, and her screaming out, unclean, unclean, and all that kind of stuff is just so powerful that it almost belongs in a different book. It almost, that goofy kind of boys' adventure story that I really enjoyed almost gets sidetracked by the kind of raw psychosexual power of that particular scene. I don't even remember why I'm saying that, though. Oh, because you expected it to be more of that kind of thing.
Yeah, I think I'd read, or I knew that scene one way or another, whether I'd read it or what, and I expected a lot of that sort of thing. Turns out that's the only Mina Harker.
That's the big one,
scene.
And then you've got the vampire brides who are kind of sexy or whatever. But
yeah, I mean, I was expecting more of that too, because I had seen Coppola's version,
which
I had
is
seen
way
hypersexualized, and then you have all these other vampire stories, so you figure they share something in common with the original source, and then you get in here and it's very Victorian and all about the host,
right?
So
yeah, I mean, Hollywood, imagine this, Hollywood sexed it up a little bit. I mean, I know that's hard to imagine from our friends in Los Angeles that they would do such a thing. Yeah, for obvious reasons, ever since the silent film, actually not since the silent film days, because the first Dracula movie, Nosferatu, the Symphony of Horror, is if you've seen, probably everybody listening to this will have at least seen a little clip or a picture. He's the kind of rat-like creeping, is that a reference that
Werner Herzog.
Yeah, Werner Herzog did a version of it too.
It's actually pretty good, isn't it?
Yeah, it's decent. It's decent. So that version actually comes the closest to making Dracula into just a creepy crawly monster. But ever since the Bela Lugosi days in, I think, 1930 or right around there, Dracula has always been played by a matinee idol, good-looking, chiseled, clean-shaved, pretty boy. That's just how people expect Dracula to be these days. It's really not exactly what Stoker had in mind. Even if Stoker was being sexual, it was a much more intentionally perverse and disgusting.
Uncanny. It's the right word. He used it himself a lot, but it's the right word.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, Mina says it about.
Jonathan's the first to say it.
That's right.
So let's talk a little bit about the book's structure, because I think it actually has a pretty interesting structure, because it starts with this extended, it's almost like a short story or something like that. And to me, I would say that's the most powerful part of the book. If I had to guess, I'd say, besides Bela Lugosi, this book owes its longevity principally to that first section of Jonathan really, going into Transylvania. Really, I don't know. Did you guys like the structure of the book? I don't even know what to ask about it. But
well, by the structure of the book, do you mean the arc, or do you mean like the?
Well, it's kind of divided into these three. It's kind of has this weird 3-act structure. You got Act 1 is just this: Jonathan Harker goes to Transylvania and has a crazy vampire uncanny adventure. And then Act 2 is very much Brandon's invasion literature. It's Dracula tries to take his show on the road and bring it to London.
Act 3, they chase him back to Transylvania.
And then Act 3 is my boy's adventure story where it's all about catching the right train and getting there in time and racing the sun and all that kind of stuff.
Since Brandon's part 2 and you're part 3, can I have part 1? Because that was my favorite part.
Your part 1.
Jonathan trapped in Dracula's castle.
Got to scale the wall.
Having to scale the walls, having to deal with the ladies.
Yeah.
The weird sisters.
It's our second book in a row with 3 weird sisters.
They even call them weird sisters.
I think Van Helsing calls them that,
he
doesn't
does,
he?
yeah.
Yeah, that first section, I don't know what else to say about the structure besides that the first section's great, and then the other 2 sections do, I think, suffer by comparison. There's merit to the other 2 sections, I think, but that
the first section's just truly horrifying.
Yeah.
It's suspense carries you through. Drives you forward through that whole section. Yeah. And then everything else after that's kind of obvious. You know what's going on and nobody else does, and you're waiting for them to put the pieces together. It's interesting because it does have a tension of its own, but it's not the same sort of suspenseful what's going to happen to Jonathan next or what's going to happen to them next, because you're not the one, in the Jonathan story. You're the one who doesn't know what's going to happen next. In the rest of the novel, or for most of the rest of the novel, you see it all coming, and the tension is: are they going to be able to put the pieces together? Are they going to? When are they going to realize that Mina's being sucked dry by Dracula? When are they going to?
Yeah.
When are things going to stop going so badly for them? So every unfortunate thing that could possibly happens.
Right.
Poor Lucy.
Poor Lucy.
Yeah.
Well, I think for me, the idea of the first section is actually scarier, because when I'm out we used to live in kind of a country area, and I would go for these long walks in the woods, and sometimes I'd lose my way and I'd end up coming out onto the road and I'd have to walk through someone else's property. And I always had that thought in the back of my mind: what if I end up on the Texas Chainsaw Massacre family's house? What if I end up in some backwoods place where something other or evil is happening and I stumble across it? And that's what happens to Jonathan. And to me, that's, just personally speaking, that's a more terrifying idea than the idea of the other or the uncanny coming to us.
Mm-hmm. Yes, everything about it's such a good setup, because here he is in a strange place. He barely knows German. People are saying things that are cryptic. A little bit is over the top, but they get on that wild carriage ride, and everything is just uncanny is the right word for that first, if you can call it a short story. He's figuring things out. He's in the dark. He doesn't know what's up. He doesn't know what's going on. He's scared. He's getting more desperate. He realizes he's probably going to die at one point. Everything just keeps building and mounting, and it's just well done.
And I like all the touches of the 3 women appearing in the dust, kind of in that weird room, and the gothic kind of conventions of the place in the castle that he can't go, and there's some actual atmosphere. The place in the castle
there where he's safe.
Right. And then just some stuff that you don't expect, like Dracula's mustache, or that poor baby that gets fed to
that mother.
Oh, yeah. And then he's like, well, considering what happened to her child, it was probably for the best.
Yeah. Well, he was more concerned. He wasn't concerned about what was going to happen to her. He was concerned that she would find out what happened to the baby. Yeah. That would be a worse fate for her, which is sort of almost sweet.
Well, it's also one of those weird catch-22s in any horror story. A lot of horror stories have crummy endings, because once the monsters come out from behind the curtain, he's not as interesting as when you kind of don't know what's going on, and you've got that fear of the unknown. And so, of course, the beginning of the story is going to be the most powerful, because you're dealing with, where am I? What's this monster? We haven't seen what Dracula's capable of yet, so he's capable of anything. Once the rules are kind of established, I think some of the interest of any story like that, of the uncanny or the weird, diminishes. A good ending to this kind of story is really hard to do. What about the epistolary form? Did you guys like that? Did you buy it?
I love it. I love the whole idea of sifting through their journals. It presents some challenges to Stoker, and he wasn't quite up to all of them.
Mm-hmm.
But
there's one too many scene where someone's like, I must go on writing,
Yeah, it's like,
though the death sleep is overtaking me.
He's just like smashed Dracula over the head with a shovel or something.
Yeah.
And he's in a dark tunnel, and the voices are getting closer, and he's writing about this. I gotta pull out my candlestick and write this down. It's like,
people are always saying things like, I've discovered that writing can really clear one's head, so I must put these.
Yeah. everybody's got to justify no, Lucy is in her room and there's a wolf outside. All of the help is poisoned and her mom's dead and she's there in bed with her dead mother and she's writing a journal entry. What? That said, it's trying to write the kind of novel he was trying to write using that form was a hard thing to do. But I really like that form. I don't know what it is. It's really interesting and compelling. Maybe some of it's just the thrill you get from reading somebody's secrets or something like that.
Yeah.
So I don't know. But one of the things I loved about, sorry to bring this up again, but the Monster Squad was they found not Harker's journal, not Mina's, not Lucy's. They got Van Helsing's diary,
right,
which doesn't appear in Dracula. We get some fragments
randoms or something.
We get some fragments from Van Helsing, but we always wonder as we go through, what does he know and what does he have and where does it all come from? It's sort of like what's behind. And part of that's because I think he's protecting the mystique of Van Helsing, but part of me is like, man, I wonder what's in Van Helsing's diary. What does he have to say? What does he learn? Where's he going when he goes off to find the necromancer?
Exactly. That's what I was thinking. Is you want to hear what happens to Gandalf, but you never get to see it,
unless
the saints preserve us from Peter Jackson doing his version of
Gandalf's backstory.
Right, exactly.
I think that you started seeing some of the limitations of the epistolary style early on. He was willing to play around more with the fragments and stuff that he would get from other sources, and then that just completely disappears by the third act. So it's just all their journals.
Yeah, I really like the newspaper clippings and stuff.
Yeah,
like
but that just eventually
cool.
You just get the feeling that Stoker just gave up. Like he couldn't think of any other way to interweave that back into the novel.
Yeah, and even his choice of who to give the scene to, which is great, I'd say, for the first 2/3 of the novel. He's ham-fisted sometimes with the stuff we were just making fun of, but he's pretty good about using the form to give us the right point of view at the right time, and that's important. I think it's fun that Dr. Seward gets to tell us so much of the story from his very dry clinical perspective. I think it's interesting that Van Helsing gets to tell us almost none of the story until the very end, and then
I do think Harker and Seward, I wish there was just a little bit more differentiation in their voices, because I found myself sort of at points being confused about who was...
I did this. I forgot who was telling the story. Yeah. So I was like, oh, he's looking at Jonathan Harker and commenting on him.
I thought this was Harker.
Right.
But it was only really Seward and Harker that I got confused. Of course, obviously, he gave Van Helsing that ridiculous accent.
Which he even kind of wrote in that ridiculous accent a little bit.
And Mina's always,
oh, the goodness of men.
The second coming of the Virgin Mary.
Right. All of her entries just begin like, I'm so thankful for brave, stout-hearted men.
Gentlemen. Oh, true gentlemen.
We poor ladies, I think she says more than once. I've just
if only I had a man like Bram Stoker to appreciate my feminine virtue.
We'll get into her a little bit more later. Is there anything else worth saying about the structure of the novel or the epistolary form or anything like that?
It stays pretty compelling all the way through. It, as it changes, as it develops, it doesn't have the same kind of compelling that it does in the first act, but
given that there was no way he could actually sustain that Jonathan Harker story for another page, I think he stretched that one out as much as he could. I don't blame him for abandoning it. You could argue that he should have just published there, maybe. Given that he was going to do a novel and that he needed to change it up, I think he changed it up well, and I like having the Jonathan stumbles on the other and then follow that up with the other invades and then follow that up with we kick the other's caboose.
Well, I was compelled to keep reading, and I read through. It was candy.
Let's talk about the good guys. Let's talk about Van Helsing. He's I think, influential character in the literature of the uncanny. Pretty much every horror story, especially in the first half of the 20th century, would always have some scientist dude come in just to give all the exposition, explain everything, know everything.
Sherlock Holmes, everything.
Sherlock Holmes, everything. People tend to be hit or miss on whether they like Van Helsing or just think he's kind of annoying. One of the critical readings I read said something like, Van Helsing would be a great character if Stoker had any clue how to write dialect. They were just found his dialect so off-putting that it ruined the character for them.
I didn't find it off-putting. It was hard to read sometimes.
A little difficult to make sense of. And I thought it was... maybe somebody out there, I never got to the bottom of this, can clue me in, but I thought it was really weird. So he's Dutch, right?
Yeah.
So he's Dutch, but then like he speaks in German instead of...
Yeah, I don't know. He said mein Gott a couple times. Or
Gott im Himmel.
Oh, yeah, he did.
Maybe Stoker just didn't know Dutch.
The difference between German and Dutch.
It's entirely possible.
You would think you might, like, if you're going to write a Dutch character and...
Know a little bit about it.
Why make him Dutch? Why not just make him German if that's what you know?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because he's got to be able to get over to and from London quickly.
Did you guys like the sort of colorful things about Van? You know, he has him laugh after that funeral. Did you think he was successful in giving him those moments?
I did. I liked those moments. I thought they worked. I don't have a problem with Van Helsing. The only problem I have is with, you know, some of, I think, problems that we see throughout Stoker, things that are with him. It's not...
His weakness as a storyteller or as a writer.
His weakness in characterization or in dialogue.
Yeah. What is his weakness in characterization in general? Just about, you know, given our group of fearless vampire hunters.
It's just that everybody's so two-dimensional, which is fine. I mean, you can have a boys' adventure story with pretty two-dimensional characters. I mean, there's a sense in which our Tolkien's characters are sort of similarly two-dimensional, but what he doesn't do is tell you over and over how two-dimensional they are through dialogue. We don't have, 10 pages of how awesome Mina is and how everybody thinks Mina's the most perfect, and it's just like, oh, please. And we never actually see much of Mina's virtue except for the mind of a man part.
We see that. Yeah.
We do get to see that because she has that, mind of a man quality when she comes up with a greater creative idea. But we don't see any of the other feminine virtues on display. We just get told, that as soon as Van Helsing sees her, he knows that she's the picture of feminine virtue and beautiful in every way. And we just get all this exposition.
And you get it said with a lot of
then
pathos.
He digs his heels in and just kind of keeps churning his exposition of... It's just badly done, I think. Which isn't to say that it's bad that we have a strong, virtuous female damsel in distress at the heart of the novel in any way. It's just that he didn't play that so well. Mm-hmm. And there are things about how he played Van Helsing that he didn't do so well, or any of the other characters,
Well, Van Helsing is the rankest offender as far as immediately sentimentalizing Mina to the moon and just meeting her one time, and then she's this goddess that...
If he's trying to play into just the way that you want to play into the body and the blood, the crucifix, whatever, then he's trying to play into the Virgin Mary.
I would argue that Mina as a conception is sound, because if you're going to write a story about a thief, you want to read the story about the thief robbing Fort Knox. You want to read about them going after the big game. And Mina, for Dracula, a defiler of all that is good, to have her be this holy kind of perfect exemplar of all Victorian virtue, I don't really have a problem with that.
No,
in fact, I kind of like it, and it's one of the things I responded to as a kid, is that that they're all protecting this wonderful lady, but it could have been done with a little more subtlety and artfulness, perhaps,
without the over the top cheesiness with them all holding her hands and crying and them laying their heads on her chest and weeping, and
she's more everybody's mother, and
more exclamations
sister,
about how virtuous and beautiful she is. It's very sentimental and Dickensian in that way.
Yeah, it is.
It's just over the top. Cheesy.
It made me think of Dickens' heroines are often kind of like that, aren't they?
Yeah, I mean, when anyone talks about sentimentality, the scene I think of is where the chimney sweep dies in Bleak House, and as he's dying, I think I may have mentioned this before.
I think you did, but mention it again.
He's saying, he'll say, and now he took his last breath, and then he starts to quote the Lord's Prayer. Dickens does, in between lines, "Thy will be done." Chimney Joe, whatever his name is, looked up with a tear in his eye and said, "Aren't you a good lady? Thy will be done." It's just
so cheesy.
And so you can see the same thing here with the men all just exuding about how wonderful she is.
Well, I mean, it's a really powerful concept. You have a beautiful, vulnerable, virtuous woman, and then you have this band of dudes, and she's being preyed upon by pure evil. And you have this band of dudes that are gonna do something about it. And they're going up against centuries old evil, and they don't care. It's the right thing to do. They've got to protect their men. They're made to protect, and that's what they're going to do. And so that in itself, being the heart of the story is really strong.
Mm-hmm.
And it does lend effectiveness to a lot of the story, to the scene, the scene where she is defiled.
Yeah.
Wouldn't be effective unless he had, in some sense. Sure, it's cheesy the way he does it, but you do understand and feel that something very pure is being hurt in a unspeakable way.
Yeah.
When that happens,
I think there are ways that you could have been made to feel it more.
right?
But yeah, that concept is strong, and that is why that scene is still so powerful.
Yeah, it could have been more artfully done.
Yeah.
But, I mean, even Dickens has really good things that he does with characters, even though he's over the top a lot of the times, too. And so guys who are strong on plot but weak in character still do good things.
Mm-hmm.
Is there somebody here?
Hey.
Yeah.
The doors are locked, right?
So for those of you who are just tuning in, we're actually recording this. It is midnight 07.
I saw something go by the window.
It's midnight 07 right now. We're in a room. All the other lights in the building are out. And it looked like something just went by the window, folks. So
when I opened the door, there was nothing there.
right.
So,
When Jake opened the door, there was nothing there. He peered into the
We
blackness.
will keep you posted.
We'll keep you posted.
This has become a real-life horror
Right,
story.
and I'm not making any of that up. We can only hope that we're virtuous enough to. Which one of us is Mina in this scenario?
yikes.
What were you saying about Dickens and
Something.
plot? Some writers are really good at.
Yeah, they're
plot.
really strong on plot, and their characters will become flat and two-dimensional. Keep looking at the window now.
I can't stop.
Yeah, I know. I wish I could look at the window, but my back's to it.
You'll be the first to die.
I'm going to be Quincy, of course.
You're the
Yeah,
Texan.
you're the Texan.
Die. Oh well. I wouldn't rather. I could think of worse ways to die. Whatever he says.
Right.
He doesn't say that. I can think of worse ways to die.
It was my honor, little Philly, or whatever.
My
crap.
subconscious guilt is manifesting itself
Right.
visually outside of our window.
That is really creepy, actually. The idea of something just going by that window is like
That's what it looked
perfect.
While we're talking about Dracula.
right.
Yeah.
So people that are strong on
So they're
plot,
strong on plot. They'll often be weak on character, but they'll still have good things to say and good things that they'll do with their stories.
Stoker could have, for instance, given us a couple scenes that would really give us a strong idea of why Mina's so virtuous. Like you said, Jake, we don't really have that. I think he does an okay job with her narrative voice being sweet and likable. I mean, she can be a little cheesy at times, but
Yeah, where I was going to go was Walter Scott. It's very similar in the fact that it's all very two-dimensional in their virtues and their morals, and all the men are either very good or they're very bad, and they're the kind of men who are predators, and they're the kind of men who are knights in armor. And you get the same sense here. I mean, all three of her Lucy's suitors are like the best men in the world, and so every man who comes in is the best man who ever existed, and so they're all very manly. And so yeah, his blood's going to be vital blood because he's a real man. And then it's not just him, it's not just Arthur whose blood is vital. Quincy's blood is very vital too. He's like the man. And then no, Dr. Seward, he's also like, whoa, he's a man too. And it's like this. So.
and Van Helsing,
Yeah.
doesn't he give blood?
So there's a little bit of fakeness about it, but since the world he's building is full of this, it's believable, actually.
Yeah.
Just like Dickens' worlds are believable, even though they're sometimes really silly.
Right.
So
I bought it as a kid, and I still bought it.
I bought it.
Now. I mean,
it only bothers me when I'm trying to be analytical about it, but when you're actually in the story, it works. Just fine.
there's one too many scene of them like crowding around and hugging each other and talking about how great they all are.
But you forgive it.
My favorite part is when all these super smart people who are going to be steps ahead of Dracula don't realize that Renfield's a threat, and then are like sending Mina up to the room and keeping her out of things and congratulating
And then
themselves.
every page, every paragraph, patting themselves on the back. Like,
Meanwhile, everything about Mina is like, suddenly she's like growing ill and weak and faint, and she's got a scarf around her neck. You know, like
her teeth are protruding just a little bit more.
How many times can they leave Lucy alone?
Did you get the contrast between Lucy and Mina is interesting, or asking the question perhaps of whether there is one. Did Stoker intend for Lucy to deserve her fate somehow?
That's interesting. So you mean she's a little sillier?
Well, she's sillier. She's perhaps more beautiful. I mean, I get the impression that Mina would be the one with that wore glasses, you know, at the beginning of the movie, and then halfway through, she'd probably take them off and be a total babe. But you know, Mina's the nerd, and Lucy's like the classically beautiful one in my mind, at least. Kind of
like Elizabeth and Jane,
right? Yeah.
With Jane's good virtue.
More like Elizabeth and Lydia, though. Maybe like Lucy's kind of flirtatious,
but she's not really like she's simpler, and she's not as mature as Mina. And I think you're supposed to see that because Mina's the one who has this journal, and she's the right fit for Jonathan Harker, and she's his helper, and she has interesting things to say about feminists.
Yeah.
But at the same time, Lucy's best friends with Mina.
Yeah.
Our heroine, and she is the woman that our virtuous supporting cast is fixated on and trying to marry. So I don't think
Lucy or Mina.
Lucy is.
Yeah, Lucy.
They're trying to.
And in those that weird section with that old sailor man.
Yeah.
That
I couldn't hardly understand a word he said.
I remember that now. I was just like, what in the world
is going on and why?
Something about a gravestone and a guy who committed suicide.
The guy to carry the gravestone as a testament to heaven.
But you kind of get that.
Becomes like important later on in the novel because did you catch that?
Does it?
Yeah, because
explain it to us.
There's a section where Van Helsing realizes, or maybe Mina realizes, that the whole reason Dracula could take advantage of Lucy there on that bench was because it was by the unhallowed grave of the suicide.
Oh yeah,
yeah.
I did always wonder how Dracula got invited in, because he makes such a big to do of Renfield being the one that invites Dracula in to over the threshold to take Lucy. Or to take Mina.
So I don't know why this suicide is grave, because apparently it has to be unhallowed, but still somehow... I never got the whole what he could rest in.
Yeah, the rules were weird. Like, I wasn't sure if they had destroyed his last resting place, would he have just been like up Crap Creek? You know, like what would he have done?
I just think he would have had nowhere to run and nowhere to sleep, right? I did get the feeling that he was required.
Well, there was a big part of the novel is him spreading his resting places all over the place. But my only point in bringing up the old sailor man was simply that in that scene, you obviously have Lucy as like the belle of the ball, the prom queen, and Mina's like her nerdy friend that all the old people want to like touch Lucy and be with Lucy and talk to Lucy. Yeah. And, you know, Mina's just like... You know, she's the one that's wearing glasses in the movie, in my head at least.
Yeah, my sense was that Lucy is the beautiful but still virtuous, good woman who all these men love. Mina is...
But everywhere Mina goes, everybody can see her virtue on her face and in her complexion and in her bearing, and her beauty is radiant. So I don't know that... I just don't know that I'm buying...
Well, they say things like she's pretty, though. I mean, I don't know. I just imagine Lucy as being the classically beautiful one, I guess.
Yeah, well, okay, so I imagine Lucy as a blonde and Mina as a brunette.
Which they always are in the movies, by the way.
Yeah, nobody hates Mina.
Right.
And I don't think that you're supposed to get the sense that Lucy deserves what happens to her.
Well, that's just one of the obvious Freudian readings that you always hear is Lucy has these three suitors, and she's obviously got these desires that are, you know, bigger than what are allowed her as a woman at the time. Then she has all these guys give blood to her, which is kind of this weird thing. And Van Helsing even makes a joke out of it when, poor Arthur is like, you know, I'm so glad that I could do, be the one. And then Van Helsing, it's almost like I was married to her. And then Van Helsing's like, yeah, she's good job, Arthur. Actually, everybody was married to her by that logic, idiot.
Wasn't that what causes King Laugh to come?
Yeah, that's what causes King Laugh to come. And King Laugh, when he come.
He come.
Van Helsing almost sounds Jamaican in that.
Oh, King Laugh. He come.
King Laugh, yes. One of my favorite characters. So you guys just think that's dumb and you reject that theory?
I can see how it's a theory that fits like Francis Ford Coppola's version of
Sure.
Dracula, but if you're actually reading the novel as Lucy is presented, she's not presented as some bimbo
Right.
with a bunch of men.
I mean, she is pretty
She
obnoxious
deals-
when she's talking about her 3 suitors. That's the only evidence you'd have for it, is her just being like, to get 3 engagements in one day. That feels a little bimbo to me.
Yeah.
Maybe,
Well, but what would you expect a girl to say to her best friend in a letter when she's been hoping for, one guy to propose to her, and her life is centered around when is she going to get married and who's she going to get married to, and to all of a sudden have what else is she going to write about, and how's she not going to say it in a way that's not sort of gushing and maybe a little bit proud? Yeah, but I don't even think it comes across all that poorly, and I think that at least by her account, she seems to handle those other 2 guys with honor, and
yeah,
feel
I
appropriately
agree.
bad for possibly leading them on. I don't.
Yeah.
Maybe she's just a bit of a flirt, but
I was just playing the modern Freudian critics advocate there.
Yeah,
I don't really agree with that.
I mean, I see what they're trying to do with it. I just think, and why?
Well, and they would read so much into Mina talking about the new woman, that one little section, and say that she's repressed too, and she wants to break out of societal conventions, and that's just nowhere in the novel, but they do say that. She's always gushing about societal conventions. She's several like, oh, thank heaven for societal conventions.
Yeah, and they would say, well, of course she would. She's trying to
fit in, trying to be a good, meek little wife and
in a
everything.
subconscious.
Right.
She's less mature, and you get the sense that she doesn't necessarily deserve it, but that Dracula chooses her because he chooses Mina to get revenge, right?
Yeah.
And that's his undoing. His animal nature takes over, and his child brain allows his own destruction because he chooses the wrong woman. He chose Lucy because he knew that she was prey.
it was opportunistic, right?
Yeah.
My understanding is she got up and happened to sleepwalk herself to a place where she was vulnerable, next to the unhallowed grave.
But you get the picture later on that Dracula, he's the kind that watches and he knows who he's after. Because you get that scene where he's watching that woman in the carriage.
Yeah, when Jonathan and Mina just encounter him.
So he's very careful about who he chooses and the prey that he chooses. He goes for the beautiful woman who could eventually be one of his brides.
Mm-hmm.
And so Lucy's only failing is that she happened to be beautiful and young and immature and
in the wrong place at the wrong time.
Yeah, it would have been some other girl in Whitby if not her.
Yeah, none of those things are like allow for this sort of reading where Bram Stoker is punishing her in some way for being the young Lydia.
But what about the phallic implications of her fiancé driving a stake through her heart when she tries to express herself as a liberated woman, Brandon?
Not everything.
Brandon Morrow or Brandon Justine.
Everything's
Thank you, Siri.
We're now going to drive a stake into Siri's heart.
Okay, so we're having some interesting, uncanny things happen.
Yeah.
I'm sure Stoker didn't come up with the wooden stake.
No, he didn't.
So that it's phallic, I don't...
Yeah,
I mean, not everything's a phallic symbol.
Right. Cigar. Sometimes a cigar is just a cigar.
Yeah, exactly. That's the line I was trying to think of. Thank you.
Yeah.
Sometimes a steak is just a steak, and you could see pretty much anything phallically if you wanted to. So yeah, Freudian psychology, it allows you to talk about the uncanny, and it allows you to talk about the return of the repressed and all these things that make, as Christians, we realize that we want to not see our sin. And so, yeah, that's true. But then also, at some point, you have to just realize that Freud was a pervert. And a lot of the stuff he talked about was because he was fixated on these perversions, and so everything became phallic.
Yeah.
And so, if you want to see everything that way, sure.
Oedipus complex. I mean, yeah.
But sometimes it's just a stake you're driving into the heart of a monster to kill it.
Right.
Because that's the juju that you have to go through.
Yeah.
Every monster's got its juju.
And then you got to cut off their heads and stuff garlic in their mouths.
They hate the chivalry that is there, where they explain that it needs to be Arthur because he needs to be the one to set her free, right? To give her rest.
It's his right.
Yeah, it's his right. And there's nothing sexual about it. He's putting her at rest because she's
it's the last virtuous, noble act that he can perform for
Yeah.
the woman that he loves.
So there's no reason to read it sexually. Sure, you could. You could also read it. I'm sure you could read it as a Marxist something.
yeah.
Or you could read it as...
Like I referenced earlier, that scene where
and-
Jonathan cuts Dracula in that one house where he stabs him with his knife and then all the money comes out. I've seen like whole papers about the Marxist and
That's the wonders
implications of that.
That's one of the wonders of the modern academy is that you can read anything pretty much any way you want to.
Right.
And make it sound pretty fancy with the right words and the right set of terms. I guess that's the same thing, right? Words and terms. But yeah, why? Why not just take it on face value? He's telling you that this is a chivalric world where the men protect the women and the women appreciate being protected.
And I liked that as a kid, and I still liked that as an adult reading the novel.
And to be honest, I think it's kind of true.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, it's not true
If there,
in all
if
the
there were
ham-fisted
vampires
ways.
attacking right now, I'm sure my wife would be very grateful for me going out and fighting the vampire and not making her go along.
Right. I would hope.
She wouldn't want to throw on her leather suit and go out and fight it with me.
That's what I responded to as a kid, and that's kind of what I still respond to. I like these dudes just taking responsibility for, well, there's a monster that's threatening our women, so I guess we got to do something about it. I think probably the most successful two-dimensional characterizations are actually just the three dudes. I like them as you got your laconic American stereotype guy that's
How many times does Stoker use the word laconic?
pretty much any time he talks, it's like he said laconically.
Should have just called him laconic.
Right. And he's always saying things like, hey there, little
missy.
Little missy. And it's just like Stoker obviously had never met an American, maybe didn't know where America was on the map.
But he sure did know the pervasive stereotype.
He sure did.
That somehow predated.
Well, you said something while you were reading it, Jake, that I thought was kind of fun, which is that it's just fun to see that those stereotypes go back that far.
Yeah,
you know,
I
John
did
Wayne
think it was
didn't
fun.
invent the Western stereotype. It
Or
was
Roy Rogers.
Or Roy Rogers, yeah.
Yeah, Texas was known for that way back in 1890
Yep.
something.
Good job, Brandon. Quincy is a Texan, right? Yeah.
Oh,
Yeah, he
he's
is.
a Texan.
So how did you
Because
feel?
of course he is.
How did you feel about Quincy? How did you feel that he expressed your great state? Did it honor?
Sure.
How about that scene where he fires his gun through the window and the bullet ricochets around?
I was trying to shoot the bat. There's a bat up there.
I saw that there bat. I was going to shoot it.
He spends like half the novel going outside, like he saw a bat out there. It's just,
It was just Quincy shooting the bats again.
Need killing.
ever since this whole business started, why I've developed a bit of a distaste for bats.
All you fancy London boys want to do is talk.
I'm going to go kill some bats.
You get the feeling he's going to go through life anytime he sees a bat, just
And then he's the one who
nice knowing you, bats. That's what he should have said after he killed Dracula.
should have been shooting gypsies all along.
Yeah. Speaking of stereotypes, I really like that random Jewish stereotype that shows up at the end where it's like, with much counting of gold and wearing a fez. It's just like how much. I guess I should ask, did you guys think the novel was like xenophobic or.
Just a little bit.
It's everything but white London phobic if you're going to make it phobic.
Yeah, I'd be with the
Everything's
modern critics there. I'm sure they say it's xenophobic, and I'd say, yeah, of course it is.
Phobic?
It's a novel all about how British gentlemen are awesome and everyone else sucks. Like
All that's out there is monsters and wolves and
cowering gypsies
gypsies are going to stab you. So,
and not tell you there's a vampire in the castle. Don't
Don't go to the castle.
Yeah, all they do
There's
is-
a vampire.
cross themselves and
Guard themselves from the evil eye and make subtle hints.
take this; it will protect you. How about you say, "Take this; it will protect you from the vampire"? What? Did you think the novel was classist? As long as we're checking off these modern.
I thought it was
criticism boxes.
classophobic.
Was it classophobic?
Everything's phobic.
They got a lot of scenes, especially in the last third, where they like have to deal with like coachmen.
It's a good thing that we have an aristocrat,
right.
well, it
Lord-
seems like
Goldeming.
all class problems can be solved with beer.
Right. That's really true. It's just like they have to get everyone drunk.
He was just thirsty, which is I took it to just mean that they wanted him to buy him a drink, right? Every time,
Right? Yeah.
somebody who was trying to get information out of was thirsty. Well, it just turned out he was thirsty.
It's a good thing I'm.
Oh boy, yeah.
Those guys that the Renfield attacks, right? They were just buy them a drink and they're fine.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're a good old chap now.
I mean, I guess the captain of the Demeter was a decent fellow, and
Yeah, that story was nice.
that was a cool little set piece that you don't expect. I think I wish Stoker would have done an even more evocative job of that, but that's a cool little story that you don't expect. The ship.
It's imaginative. It's not what.
There's a creepy idea of being stuck on a ship and everyone's throwing themselves over the board. There's a little of the Mary Celeste in there, if you know that, or unexplained story. Look it up on Wikipedia, folks.
The only thing I'd say is if there is classism and racism or whatever, it comes from maybe his weakness as a writer, whatever you want to see it as, but just the fact that everything is very two-dimensional.
Right.
So when the world's two-dimensional like that, everything is two-dimensional.
The gypsies are
So it's
types.
not like, it's not like he's intentionally a racist. It's just everything, even technically, even the way that he presents the men, they're all the same.
Right. They're basically all
There's
the same
nothing
dude.
different about any of them.
Quincy has a different accent.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But Quincy is Arthur, is Dr. Seward, is...
We have all the men that we meet are righteous dudes who are heroes. All of the women are virtuous women, and then there's Dracula who's evil, and then there are these like other people that you run across. And
But then you get these glimpses of a little bit more depth with him, because you have that section where Mina wants them to have sympathy on Dracula,
Yeah.
right? And
free him.
She's happy
thought
that
that
she
was
sees a little glimpse of like his soul being at peace after they stab
yeah, that was
the
a
crap out of him.
surprising. Well, like what you were saying with the ship and getting the captain of that, it was a surprising moment of depth in a fairly flat moral world of the story. So she's wondering, with even as depraved as he was there still something about Dracula that could be saved?
Right.
basically.
And of course, modern versions have taken that and run with it, and Dracula's pretty much always the anti-hero, hero of the story.
And then actually in a brilliant little touch at the end, it's Mina who's writing about his death when they finally kill him, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so she's the one who says that she thought maybe for a moment there was like a look of peace on his face.
Yeah.
Right? And you don't know if that's going back to her wanting to see it. So it's... Or if it actually was a moment of peace. I'm not sure that Stoker was subtle enough to have it be unintentional.
Right.
Probably there was a look of peace on his face.
Right.
That's how I took it.
Yeah.
I don't know why, considering the fact that he sounded like an awful guy even before he was a vampire. But let's talk about our eponymous character himself, Dracula. What did you guys? I guess I'll just start by opening up the floor a little bit. Obviously, he's a really iconic monster. What were your expectations of him, and did he meet them?
I think I expected him to not have a mustache.
Yeah.
I expected him to be more seductive. I expected him to be less clumsy and more... So the way I came to the book, but then also the way that what Stoker says about him versus how things unfold and play out don't quite meet up. And he tries to mediate that with Van Helsing giving an explanation about his child brain. But it just didn't make a whole lot of sense. I expected I don't know, maybe a Moriarty, like a...
More cunning.
Much more cunning and...
He's pretty animalistic.
yeah.
Although he's well-spoken at the beginning of the novel when he's kind of in his old
That
decrepit form.
Dracula over in Transylvania, I want to see more of that Dracula.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And I didn't think it was just the demystification of,
No, I
now we've
agree.
got wrapped our heads around who he is, and so now he's not as potent because we know his limitations. I just felt like, turned out he was sort of foolish, and
His big speeches near the end are kind of clunky.
yeah, it just wasn't, he didn't come off as...
I'm not sure.
You want to feel like everything is converging. Like you have this centuries old or millennia old force of evil and darkness that has like had a reign of terror over, Romania. And you want to feel like all of that, the weight of that, has finally met its match in time and God's providence and the right people, the right mix of people, and just the right amount of good fortune or good luck. It didn't quite live up to that. I mean, it did. I mean, that is what happened.
I'd put it at about 80%. I don't know. I'd say like it almost lives up to it. It's pretty good.
Yeah, I mean, it's disappointing that the two big things are the fact that the hypnotism and and he's asleep on a boat.
Yeah,
And that's it. Like that's what it comes down to.
Yeah, you kind of expect him to have one more ace up his sleeve when he's doing the whole boat thing. But
you were hoping for like they would get to the wagon and open it and he wasn't there or something. Right. And
yeah,
although he was,
why couldn't we have even made it back to the castle and had the showdown be there? Or I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's the right answer. I don't know what the right answer is. It's just like anticlimactic is all.
If I was writing the movie, they would be 2 seconds too late. The sun would go down. Dracula would pop out. He'd be all powerful. And then we'd get this awesome climax where everything's at stake. He's at full capacity.
He would be the one who kills Quincy.
He'd be the one that kills Quincy. But as it is, he's laying there and
But Quincy would, in the process, do something that made him vulnerable, made Dracula exposed or vulnerable for just the one instant.
Yeah.
You know.
Because what's believable is that his driving passion and lust would be his weakness, and that would cause him to be...
Right. He sees Mina over on the mountain, and he exposes himself by going after her. Let's say that'd be maybe the cheese. Maybe that's cheesy, but that's one way you could take it.
Yeah, he sees Jonathan there, and
he's like, "I don't like you, dude. I'm
gonna do this right in front of your face."
Right.
Yeah, it gets the Harry Potter weakness of everything comes down to the fact that the villain has hidden important things in easy to find places. And hey, guess what? We can go destroy them.
I've never heard a better explanation or I've never heard a better exposition of the weakness of Harry Potter. Well done, sir.
I think you want
one more great set piece.
You want a payoff.
Yeah.
You want it to pay off. You want your investment to pay off.
I think you've gotten like a handful of great. The whole beginning is a good set piece. Then the staking Lucy is a good set piece, and then him invading Mina's bedroom is a good set piece. The Demeter's a good set piece. There are these horror, action scenes or whatever you want to call them. They're the big climactic moments in the story, and you want one more of those at the end. For obvious reasons, because that's how stories are supposed to work, but you don't get it, and it just feels kind of anticlimactic. Although that may just be Stoker's writing failing us. Like, I could see you making a really cool scene out of them fighting their way through the gypsies and the danger of that and the heroism of that, but he doesn't quite pull it off.
Yeah, I mean, the disappointment is the fact that the sun does not set, and you don't have at least one last showdown. They never really have a showdown with him,
right? At the very least,
maybe in Stoker's mind, what he's done is he's built up Dracula's all-powerfulness after sundown. That the only way that it's going to happen, all the tension is, can they beat sundown?
Yeah,
but
it does have that a little bit,
but it just doesn't quite do it for me.
Well, and to be fair, we're talking about this 100 years or more after the book was written, and there's been a lot
to draw on.
We have a lot to draw on, and we're imagining how Steven Spielberg would do this. We're imagining the big Hollywood climax that would go for 20 minutes and be this great action scene. Stoker's readers probably didn't need that. This was probably, we're desensitized a little bit.
Yeah.
I won't say that Stoker couldn't have done it better, but I will defend him a little bit. This was probably plenty exciting for a lot of people at the time.
Yeah, I mean, the time bomb was ticking, and it does get to 1, right?
Yeah.
Because he's smirking because he sees the sun about to go down right as, the kabuchi knife or whatever it is, cuts his throat.
Right. He's actually smiling when they pry the lid off the coffin or whatever. Yeah. I was also a little bit unclear on the rules there. They killed him with knives.
How did they kill him with a knife? That was weird.
I think maybe because it was day, but why didn't they just wait till day and kill Lucy with knives?
Was the knife somehow hallowed?
Or maybe it was because he's centuries old, so he's going to immediately, the minute you turn him mortal, he's going to turn into dust, whereas anybody else is going to maintain their body and going to need much more to do.
Because it's a cool image that you cut his head off and the other guy plunges the knife in his chest.
Yeah, that would be pretty satisfying to do.
Just didn't fit within the rules or something.
Well, I got the sense that He couldn't keep track of all the rules anyways.
Yeah. Well, there's so many rules. I mean, poor Dracula. Garlic stops him. Running water. He has to wait. I mean, you do have to.
I can't come in the boat. Well, don't ask.
There's that whole scene where they have to deal with that.
It's so weird to have that in there.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, why, Stoker has to create Renfield to get around the problem of Dracula can't enter a place where he's not invited. Here's an idea. Just don't have that rule,
Yeah.
I actually think Renfield's pretty successful. And
That's a classic.
I love that
rule,
rule, actually, for vampire. That's my favorite vampire story rule, and it's a good allegorical kind of, don't invite the sinful thing in.
Dracula made Jonathan say that he entered Dracula's castle of his own free will or something weird like
he says,
that, right?
enter of your own free will and try and leave some of the happiness that you is his very formal formula that he says.
But he's standing in the. I remember because Stoker
doesn't
makes
cross
a deal
the
out.
threshold.
He stands right there in the doorway and blocks the doorway.
Yeah.
And he doesn't cross the threshold, and then Jonathan comes in after he has his little sort of scripted sounding thing.
And that is fun. The idea that you have to let a vampire in, let yourself into the vampire, isn't something that Stoker plays around with all that much, and obviously it's intrigued lots of people who have wanted to turn up the eroticism, but I think it's also it makes for good allegory. Did you guys think that Dracula as a character and the book in general was actually scary at any part?
Yeah, the first part.
I thought the first part was scary, and there was one point where Mina was relating maybe the first encounter with Dracula. She was relating it as a dream with the glowing red eyes hovering over her in darkness, and that made me think of a recurring dream / nightmare I had as a kid. So that was maybe more just the power of the simple imagery, or maybe it was just what I brought to it.
But let me say something to that. We've been making a lot of fun of Stoker for his clunkiness in a lot of different ways, but one thing that Stoker, perhaps intentionally, perhaps just by being bad, allows you to bring a lot of whatever scares you to it and maybe it's art on Stoker's part, or maybe it's just him not being sophisticated enough to come up with, his own ideas. But the fact that he leaves things so vague and so simple adds to the potency of the story, I think. And I think that's often true of these kinds of stories, that you can complain all you want about the two-dimensional characters and stuff, but in the end, the very two-dimensionality of the descriptions of the characters, of everything, actually allows you, in a weird way, even though it can feel clunky, even though it can feel off-putting, even though it can make for a less satisfying literary experience, sometimes it'll be this weird kind of catch-22 where it will... some of the literary qualities that you might want aren't there, but the fact that they're not there actually allows the novel to do some other things, to be primal in a way that, for example, if all these characters were really fleshed out psychologically real, then you wouldn't be able to put yourself. I mean, the nice thing about Mina, as clunky of a character as she is that you can just imagine your own version of what the prettiest, most virtuous girl looks like, and you can just plug her in,
or you can just let her be your mom,
and because there's nothing to Jonathan, you can just be Jonathan.
You could make the same case about the rules, about how you can't quite get a grasp on what the rules are and what they're not, and are they religious or are they superstitious? Like, what's garlic got to do with crucifixes? And you could say that that's Stoker trying to draw on a whole bunch of sources. You could say that Stoker being confused himself or not quite knowing what's going on. Or you could say everybody's just sort of figuring this out, and here are what Van Helsing thinks are the rules, and it sort of just adds to that unknown, mysterious quality of the world of the undead and the supernatural. All you know is it all operates on different rules than you're accustomed to, and you can only hope that you got a few of them right.
Hopefully they got enough of them right that he's actually dead at the end. I actually had never noticed the part about Van Helsing saying that he actually, in going from alive to dead, had lost some of his memory. I actually thought that was kind of a cool touch, that Dracula is relearning and has been relearning. Now, I wondered why it took Dracula like 500 years or however much, and he was still sucking this bad at his plan, no pun intended.
There was one point where it seemed like he could go to sleep for like 100 or 200 years or 500 years.
That's what they were worried about with Mina, because if he got away and managed to hide out somewhere, he could just wait and her whole life out, and then she's his bride once she dies, and that was the threat there.
Yeah. Anyhow, I got the sense from that it could be that he just woke up from a 200-year sleep or 300-year sleep or something like that.
Yeah.
So is Romania just full of a bunch of vampires?
No, I thought that the way I read it was that Dracula was something kind of special, probably the progenitor of all vampires, because he'd done all this black magic and stuff. Like, he seemed to be...
What about all his victims? Would they not become...
Oh, yeah, that's a good point. Well, he only had the 3 beautiful brides.
Yeah.
What about the babies?
Well, I just kind of assumed they just got eaten. We're not really clear on what... Does he have to do his blood baptism thing in order for you to actually turn? I thought maybe he kind of did. I thought maybe he had to give you some of his blood.
I don't know. No, I thought that it said that would just make it go quicker or expedite the
process.
Expedite the process. We're going to expedite this process for you, ma'am.
Put you on the fast track.
That's what I thought.
No, I think you're right, yeah.
What about the brides of Dracula?
I think Jake has a point when he's saying that, like, part of the terror of the rules is the unknown quality to them.
Mm-hmm.
The scariest Dracula is the Dracula at the beginning of the novel, before we find out he has a child brain and his animal passions can lead to his downfall so easily. So his brides, they have some of the scarier moments in the novel, where they're swarming around them in the snowstorm and trying to get them
that's
to
a good
come
scene.
out of the circle.
And they always kind of have this ghostly kind of, they appear out of the dust. They're just more ethereal, or whatever the bad word is for ethereal. They're negative ethereal. They're more ghostly and kind of creepy, and maybe just more scary for me because I'm a dude, so I'd be their prey.
Well, you'd be their prey and they would seduce you.
Yeah.
I mean, Jonathan wanted it. That was what was...
That's the most explicitly sexual scene.
It is.
Where he's
it is, and it's part of what he wants to protect Mina from. When he says, here it is, we should have total trust between us, so here it is, but don't read it.
Yeah.
You don't want to read it.
Right.
And I think that's a big part of it, that feeling that in that moment he was
tempted.
He was tempted, and he knew it.
Yeah.
And if Dracula hadn't saved him, he would have...
It is interesting.
And a sub-husband, I guess.
A sub-husband? He's like a third level down from Dracula. You're Dracula, then you got the brides, then you got their husbands.
And his brides.
And then he can start his own bridedom, yeah. That sounds kind of cool, I guess. Get some babes, vampirize them.
That's awesome.
It's not a bad whatever vampires called living. Yeah, I thought they were pretty well done in this reading. They're voluptuous in just the right measure, and there's something profane about them that's differently profane about Dracula. I don't know how to parse that without being weird, but it's there and it's interesting. So, in summation, I guess I should just ask, this was our first pot boiler, first pure horror story, first thing that's it's questionable whether it should be in the canon or not. What'd you guys think? Did you like it? Would you recommend people read it? Do you think it should be in the canon or shouldn't be in the canon? The canon, I don't know.
It's a fun read. It's a nice little adventure story with, a lot of iconic imagery. But as far as, is the canon, what defines the canon?
I don't know. What defines the canon, Brandon?
I mean, if it's something like Pride and Prejudice or East of Eden or Huckleberry Finn, this is certainly not in that class.
No, it's not.
I think there are two ways of seeing the canon. One is it's those books that have influenced, whether or not we want them to have influenced, literature. The other way is it's the books that if you could have them continue to influence, they would continue to influence literature.
So no question about the first one, and then I would say no to the second one.
Yeah, if I had a time capsule where I was throwing a bunch of novels in for kids 1,000 years from now, I don't think this would make it in unless it was a really big capsule.
There's a lot of books I'd put in that time capsule before Dracula, but perhaps perhaps I'm a sentimental old fool, but I still really liked it, and I would give a copy to young Nathan and say, eat your dark little heart out, my boy.
Yeah, I'm not going to discourage my kids from reading it.
If you're going to read one vampire novel, Dracula's the one. How about that?
I can sign on to that.
Yeah.
If you're going to read 0 vampire novels, that's also probably okay.
Probably for the best.
Well.
And insane.
And then see, do I give you the last word? I can decide in the editing. Today's episode was written and produced by Nathan Alberson. It was performed by Nathan Alberson, Jake Menskill, and Brandon Chastfiend. You can go to gorehornmedia.com for more horrifying content. And be sure to rate us highly on iTunes. Not really Gorehorn Media, it's warhornmedia.com.